Hey guys, welcome to the Tetra Health and Performance Podcast. Today we're talking a fun topic. We're talking strength, lifting weights, lifting plates. So if that's you, you want to learn about how to increase your strength, relative maximal strength, this is the podcast for you. But before we dive into that, let's introduce someone on the podcast today. Let's introduce Mr. Callan.
Hey,
Mr. Callan, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
G'day guys. So my name's Callan. I'm 21 and I'm studying EP, so that's exercise physiology at Sydney Uni. I just completed my placement at Benchmark recently, so that was my first placement I did, first chance to actually work in the industry. Loved it. You guys clearly love me as well. So here I am, staying on. So I've been working at Benchmark for about the last 3 months. Been taking you guys in the group sessions and been recently started personal training as well. So really keen to be here, keen to be part of the podcast as well.
Great to have you on board, mate.
Great to have you, mate.
Cool.
Should we get straight in?
Let's do it. Dive.
Cool. So with our conversation about strength today, we just want to start off with a pretty much a tricky one, really, like what is strength? So we're starting off with the way we're going to talk about strength today is more in kind of like a kind of powerlifting terms, just moving heavy weight on a bar, like Mitch just said. But we like to think of the strength as the ability to create high amounts of force for a desired time, and normally that desired time being like not super fast, but like a short duration. It's like as we get into moving a weight for long periods of time, it becomes more like strength endurance. So off that, another thing to really talk about is how strength is contextual. So you can think of so many different ways to look at strength. Well, it's not just always how much weight you can move in a bar. It can be living your day-to-day life and just feeling comfortable and feeling strong in your body. And we talk about strength as well as like an empowerment, don't we? Like we talk about it as people's like psychologically being strong or strong in situational strength. So people can be multifactorially strong. They can be strong in some aspects of their life, whether that be in the gym or outside of the gym, and then they can be not so strong as well. So strong has a really like powerful connotation in that sense, I reckon anyway. So from there, we've got strength being contextual. We've got different types of strength. Well, when we're talking in the gym, we're talking kind of two different types of strength. Ideally, we have a relative strength, where that's your body weight to weight you can move kind of ratio, and you'll find like as well as that we have an absolute strength, which is just the amount of weight you can really move. With relative strength, there is like if you look at most strength competitions, you're broken up into weight categories for good reason. The reasons being that, for example, like one reason being that the more mass you have on your body, the more likely that mass is muscle, and the stronger you will be. Another one being actually fat cells have compressive abilities. So as a muscle contracts, it can actually utilize the contraction of a muscle cell and fat cells together to create higher amounts of tension. And then off that, we have that absolute strength, which is just like, how strong are you? But quite often, I think we have to take into consideration people's weight ranges for strength. Then off that, we have different types. We have general strength, and then we have specific strength. And in the gym, these show up as kind of like general strength. This person is pretty much an all-rounder. He can move weight in many different ways. Like he can move dumbbells, he can move barbells, he's good with the kettlebells, he can do some pretty impressive feats. And then you have more specific strength. And I think this is probably the biggest, this is where people's minds go to when we talk about strength. We think powerlifters. Yep. And with powerlifters, that is very specific strength, right? Like they're aiming to improve free movements. They're aiming to improve their bench press, their deadlift, and their squat. And the way they go about training for that has to be pretty specific.
And that's a big thing with strength. When we said it's like relative to the individual, to have a track, like you need a test to know how you're progressing with your strength drill. So if you know where your strength wants to progress, to have a movement is a lookalike of what you want to progress your strength with. With powerlifting, it's the easiest example, right? They have 3 lifts: a squat, bench, and deadlift. Guess what's going to be in your program? Squat, bench, and deadlift. Because it's like having, if you're doing a math test, it's like having the math test there to test against. You know how you're progressing, and you know how to kind of further your skill set and how you're doing relative to what you need to achieve. So with whatever your definition of strength is, having a movement in there or movements that kind of look like what you are trying to achieve is massive.
So that works on well with like what strength is kind of not as well. Like in the gym, because we're moving weights, we have resistance training, and then we have strength training. Well, resistance training is normally going to be these higher rep ranges, these different types of exercise, more like band exercises sometimes, all these different variations of exercise or challenging strength, hypertrophy, all these different things can be considered like, we can call them resistance training. And then actually specifically strength training is them kind of like your ability to move some load. Yeah. As well as that, we have kind of like Mitch just kind of briefly touched on that, kind of like we have that hypertrophy training is not strength training, But it can still, like when we start in the gym and we're new beginners, coming into the gym, kind of lifting these higher rep ranges, you are going to get direct and indirect improvements with your strength. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit, but most of that's going to be neurological. Like you're going to build a little bit of an increased muscle size, but that won't happen instantly anyway. But what you are going to get instantly is you're training your brain to move some weights. That coordination, all these things that come into that are then going to make you stronger nearly instantly. The second you step in the gym, do a couple of sessions, you're probably going to be you're priming the nervous system to then go, okay, we've got better coordination. We can move some weight.
Yep, 100%. That learning effect is a big part of starting out in the gym as well. Like it will take you a while to develop that kind of coordination, but getting that under your belt, big part of moving heavier weights. Like as you move into the gym, start to get that learning, you're going to really start to put in some serious weight under.
Perfect.
100%.
We got so next up we got why be strong. Like this is where Cannon's going to get in quite a bit as well, because we've got many different reasons for why to be strong, and they're all very important. Some will be more important to others. So why be strong could be a question that you ask yourself, and there might be the different reasons and different type of training that's going to find your way of for what means strong to you. So first up we have kind of like health, and Cannon's going to jump in on this with some with stuff on health.
Yeah, so in terms of being strong, there's heaps of different advantages to just being able to lift heavy weight. So it actually has some quite good evidence that is good in the prevention and management of disease. So, for example, one of those diseases, type 2 diabetes, quite a common one, lifestyle disease. But it's been shown that weightlifting, and in terms of strength training especially, it's been shown that there causes reductions in visceral fat and then also reductions in HbA1c, and it also increases the density of type 4 glucose transporters. So what that's going to do, it's going to help you to, sorry.
You go.
Go, mate.
So what that's going to do is that's going to help you to increase your insulin sensitivity. So that's a real key thing in managing diabetes. You're going to get spikes from time to time. But in terms of strength training, be able to increase that density, then that's going to really help you to manage your blood sugar levels. It's going to control events such as hypoglycemics, all that kind of thing. And it also has really good benefits in terms of your cardiovascular health as well. So there's real good evidence behind strength training reducing your resting blood pressure, as well as decreasing that bad cholesterol. So you hear people say often, oh, I got bad cholesterol. There is also good cholesterol as well. It increases that's called high density lipoproteins. It increases those HDLs, reduces those LDLs and triglycerides. So it's really going to help you in terms of your cardiovascular health as well.
Incredible. Like that information is so important as well. Like why would people step into the gym? It's not just to move the heaviest weight possible, but strength training is going to improve your health in many different ways. And what you just mentioned, like lifestyle diseases, these are lots of things that happen these days from us, pretty much like eating too much, not eating well, being too inactive. And well, while getting into the gym can actually change most of them things. Like that's why quite often these days doctors will say, hey, like you need to see an exercise physiologist, or you need to start training to improve your health.
Yeah, exactly right. And even in the management of disease, it's great, but just the prevention, like getting into the gym, working your strength. You might not have any diseases right now, but that's going to help reduce your chances of getting those diseases down the track in the future.
Yeah. Why wait till it happens,
Yeah,
right? Why not
exactly
just
right.
get on the journey straight away and let it be a part of your lifestyle and who you are for the rest of your life, and never, never, never stop.
Exactly right.
100%. Love that. Like next up is like obviously other things as well. We discussed how the initial strength training, and going further into strength, the big differences between strength and hypertrophy are more neurological issues and neurological things. Well, like it creates neurological adaptations. So with Kadam again.
Oh yeah, so there are also neurological adaptations, as you're saying. So we were looking in this study, and it was having a look at voluntary strength being more of like a skilled act. So as opposed to it just being lifting heavy weight, we're looking at how we're coordinating all the different muscles in our bodies. So we're activating those agonists, we're supporting them with synergists and stabilizer muscles as well, and we're trying to reduce the antagonists, so the opposite muscle, to not work as much as we can, so we can produce that desired movement with as much force as we can. So it's not necessarily all just about the strength. It's about changes in that coordination and the learning that's going to facilitate you to improve the recruitment of those muscles that are involved. And that's going to help you for the specificity of those tasks like we were talking about. So those powerlifters that only need to know 3 tasks, they're going to learn the coordination perfectly to execute that biomechanically, whereas someone who might not have that much experience with the strength training, they don't have that same learning effect, where they might have the same muscle mass, muscle size, ability to move it, because they don't have those neurological adaptations that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
They're not able to produce those same numbers.
I think one of the coolest things about that, and I always think about this, is that there is no simple movements with the human body. Like everything is a task that you're acting out this task. And it's actually a lot of fine motor skills have to go on for the smaller things. And then these bigger motor skills have to go on for the bigger strength movements. But we have these kind of intra and intermuscular coordination. And that's actually the ability for inside a muscle to kind of fire at different rates, at different amounts to perform a task. It's like you think about the simple act of kind of like flicking something, and you're aiming for a certain distance. Well, that flick is going to be like you're going to have to control how hard you're going to flick, and you're going to learn from that. You're going to next time I'm going to flick a little bit less or a little bit more. And also at the same time, the what we call the intermuscular coordination is actually, well, not just one muscle working on its own, it's many muscles working together to perform these, especially with compound exercises, these exercises that involve pretty much the entire body, which is all the bench, the squat and the deadlift all involve the entire body. And then you have to organize all the muscles in your body internally, each muscle, and together as a group of muscles to complete a task. There is really no simple movements that the body does. There's a lot going on all the time.
100%. And that's what I find really interesting about strength training as well, is that it's not all in the muscle. There is some going on in the brain as well. There's some really cool things about the brain as well. Like there's this thing called the crossover training effect. So even in training in one limb, you can cause adaptations in the other. So think about that in terms of injury, rehab. Like there's so many possibilities behind that. They've done studies where they've just tested one person on single leg press. And they've tested their other leg as well. They're able to produce a higher maximal voluntary contraction with their other leg that they haven't even been training. That's so interesting to me as well, because even doing things such as imagining a contraction, so thinking about it in your head, thinking I'm producing a maximal voluntary contraction right now, can cause increases in strength. And I just find that so interesting. And there's so many different possibilities for how that could be used in terms of increasing strength in people with disability, people with injuries. And there's so many things that unlocking the strength in your brain can unlock the strength in the muscles as well.
How powerful to know as a client too, to go like, oh, I've got an injury, crap, it's a setback, rather than having that mindset of, okay, I'm out for 6 weeks, I need to recover, I've just got to do A, B, and C, and missing those opportunities for further development. Having that information in the back of your head going, oh crap, now, awesome, I'm just going to develop and get that other limb as strong as I can and get that little carryover effect and help speed up my rehab and all the other physiological adaptations you'll get into the gym as well. I'm there to strengthen my other limb and my upper body and whatever it happened else to be, other energy systems. Getting back in the gym and knowing that you have more that can be done and you're not ruled out for one set injury is huge.
Yeah.
So knowing that crossover effect is powerful.
It's great for your confidence. Like you're not feeling like you're out of the gym.
Never
I've done
out.
one ACL, I'm out of the gym for months. No, you're not. Get
Got
back in there.
yeah. And I also think that sometimes we let trying to always search for a symmetrical body hinder us. Like for example, like we most of us know that one side is stronger than the other side. Well, there is a time and a place, and there is like good reason sometimes to build up asymmetries. But if one side is way stronger than the other side, you want to, and you are in strength sports, you want to let that side rip. Like you want to make sure that side is as strong as it physically can be, because its potential just may be stronger than the other side, and you're letting down your maximal potential by not challenging ultimate strength. So, like we do tend to search for asymmetries and try and build up asymmetries too often sometimes. When sometimes, hey, let's let that one side be stronger. Because naturally, we're not symmetrical beings. We are asymmetrical. So it does make sense in training. I think I kind of think of Nadal, Rafa Nadal, when I think of that, when he had one massive arm on one side and
just
just
a tiny arm on the other side.
Yeah, and like, why would you be tiny on both sides when you can be jacked on one side?
Yeah, exactly right. Because in terms of a sports setting as well, what sport uses both limbs as much as each other? There's so many sports out there where you're so much more heavily dependent on one than the other. Like you look at baseball pitchers, they're the exact same thing. Their arms are so out of proportion because they need to be. They don't need their other arm. There's no need for it to be. So in terms of symmetries, why not let them be asymmetrical?
Even team sports on a field, like we're getting more hyper specialized. You now have like only a left center. So I'm only going to have these movement patterns firing in one way. Becoming hyper specialized even in our team sports that are omnidirectional. And you just have one field of play or one lane that you generally hyper specialize in. Again, furthering those one directional movements constantly in play.
Oh, what a topic. That's another topic for another podcast. We can hit that even harder at some stage. Just going forward, like into these kind of like these health benefits, and especially into kind of like, let's discuss a little bit about old age, kind of why strength train in your older age.
Yeah, so in terms of strength training in your older age, so as you know, with age, we're reducing our bone mineral density. So that's why you see such things as like hip fractures all the time in old people. They have a fall, and whereas when you're younger, when you're younger, you're able to withstand those forces. When you get older and that bone mineral density isn't as high as it once was, then that bone is going to fracture. And there's really good evidence behind strength training increasing bone mineral density. So there was this study and it looked at over 24,000 adults over the age of 60. and it showed a reduction in 34% in falls among those that participated in the strength program. So not only is it helping them withstand when they fall, it's preventing them from falling.
Mm.
So strength training in terms of old age can have some really great benefits. And then just in terms of the twitch fibers as well, James, I think you wanted to get into this as well, mate.
Yeah, so when we do get older, we tend to you tend to see people drift off and kind of like not actually do any more strength training. They kind of move on to these more endurance effects. And there is lots of information and studies out there to actually say that as we progress in age, we actually start losing our type 2 fibers. And our type 2 fibers actually are faster twitch fibers. And we have there is something called the size principle. So when I actually do exercises, what actually happens is I'm going to recruit these smaller muscles first, smaller muscle units first, then I'm going to slowly recruit my bigger and faster twitch ones later. Well, then fast twitch ones don't get really triggered unless we're doing explosive strength work or power work. So like Cannon just said, like we're looking at people falling over. Well, power work, strength work is going to be something that's going to neurologically help you catch yourself underneath yourself. It's also going to help you catch yourself, your body weight falling, because actually the weight of you falling your mass times acceleration can be quite a lot to have to receive into the ground, and it's going to build up your bones for when you fall over. And it's just a way to make sure you can train them fast twitch fibers, because there's not many other things. Endurance sport is not going to do it so much. It may be slightly, but the longer the endurance, the less you will actually hit. So you need to get yourself moving some reasonably decent weight. They even say for bone density, this is not scientific information right now, but they say roughly like you need 10% of what's going to break your bone, to actually strengthen your bone. So there has to be some decent load. You can't just be expecting your light jogs to do enough. And I've seen it with so many clients over years, like where they've get a DEXA scan, and the DEXA scan is actually the main reason for a DEXA scan. Whereas a lot of people now use it for like muscle density and amount of muscle and asymmetrical muscle and stuff like that. Well, the main reason for a DEXA scan was always to check bone density. Well, actually nowadays I've seen so many clients who I've trained for 6 months to a year, do a DEXA at the beginning, do a DEXA at the end, and it's so noticeable. It's so obvious that they've improved bone density. So it's such a win-win.
Yeah, it's great because those weight bearing exercises, they're putting that stress on the bones that they need. Those bones start sending those messages. They're telling your cells, hey, we need bigger bones, we need stronger bones to withstand these forces. And having that stronger bones is going to reduce those risks of those fractures, those osteoporosis, all of that kind of thing as you age and become older.
It's kind of what makes humans so impressive. We adapt to our environment, and if our environment is too kind of soft and gentle, then we will adapt soft and gentle. And soft and gentle doesn't help you when you fall over, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So the idea is that we have these things like your body's always rebuilding itself. Always, we had like osteocytes and osteoblasts going around your bone and continuously creating and breaking down bone. And if you don't tell the body that it needs to actually build that up, then it sadly it won't.
To paint the picture of how, hey, we've just said how you would train to get that, but how would it affect that earlier individual? So working that strength, power, like plyometric type of movements for an individual to have that kind of reactivity retrained because it's naturally going to be declining. That would be person goes to fall, and rather than falling, their foot can now catch itself, and that intra-coordination would now be in effect that they can restabilize and like, hey, I just stopped myself, landed on my hip, and been in the hospital for X amount of time. So having that ability, that's where it has that real world transfer. E.g., like we just said earlier, right? Elderly populations, the number one cause of injury is just falling over. That sucks, and that's a preventative measure with the right training systems in play.
And there's a sad saying that's in with a fall, so in with a hip and a fall, out with a pneumonia, which is a really common case, right? Where people do, like older people do go this. It's sad.
That's sad.
So
It's
sad.
dark on that one, yeah.
That's a horrible thing to. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the sad truth is that what happens is you injure yourself in your older age. And say, for example, you haven't strength trained previously, so you haven't built up a ton of muscle mass, and you haven't built up a ton of bone mass. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to lie down in the hospital for a while. You're going to have to rehab that, and you're definitely going to lose muscle, and you're going to lose bone density to a greater degree that you're already at. So it makes sense, as Cannon said earlier, that it makes sense to be very like proactive on your training journey, because then what happens is when people are lying down for too long, this is when complications seem to arise, and that's why they say out with pneumonia. Cool. It's a bit of a somber.
It is somber. It's like just everyone's just
Let's jump it back up a bit.
We did like just one more thing on the health basis is a bit like we did kind of discuss the protection from injury for kind of old age, but protection from injury in athletes as well is a really big thing. There's some really good information on and it's why there's strength and conditioning coaches, right? Like for one big reason is normally their KPIs is to actually reduce injury so players can have a better season.
Yeah, 100%. And we were looking into that study before that was looking at that athlete population, as you were saying. It's not just for old people to prevent injuries. Athletes get injured too a lot. And that strength training is going to help them to not get injured. So this study that looked at about 8,000 athletes reduced the risk of injury by 33%. And I found this really interesting because it said that the lower the risk of injury was in a dose-dependent manner. So essentially, for every 10% increase in strength training volume, 4% reduced risk of injury. And I found that really interesting because at what point does it stop? Like, can I train strength that much that I'm just not going to get injured? Because that does not sound right.
I am bulletproof.
Yeah, exactly right.
Well,
Like-
yes, there is. We know that there is
Yeah.
diminishing returns for strength, and that comes in athletic performance as well. Like for example, like you may at first find that getting stronger can make you faster, make you like sprint faster, make you jump higher and everything. But eventually, sometimes strength will actually eventually will slow you down. So as I start doing strength, I actually can create force faster. Yeah, and I can create a larger amount of force. But eventually that kind of velocity force profile will drop off on the other end. And I may need to, as I move heavier weight, but I start learning to create force over longer periods of time, maybe too long, to then be specific to my sport. So when I'm actually playing my sport, for example, I can't create force as quickly as the sport would need.
Well, let's help you paint a picture with that. Like, why is not every power lifter like a 100-meter sprinter, right? Surely if strength was all we ever needed, that's all would hyper specialize in, and every 150 kilo bloody power lifter would be smashing 10-second records in the 100 meter, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
There is a rare few freaks who can do it, but yeah, it's very
the 1%ers of the
outliers.
1%ers.
Yeah, exactly.
Mechanisms of
Yeah.
strength.
So just like a little bit of science behind it. Like let's talk about the mechanisms of strength. So really there's two different types of mechanisms of strength. You've got this kind of central, which is kind of what we discussed a few times. And I feel that this is the big, the changer between what hypertrophy is and what strength is, because hypertrophy is really, we're after structural gains and pretty much only structural gains as such. And we're not going to get as many, like we discussed, we're going to get beginner gains neurologically, but we won't get as many over time. So really in the central nervous system, there's two kind of different priorities or different ways that the brain communicates to the muscle to fire the muscle. And then what they're called recruitment. And recruitment is really, like I discussed, that size principle. It's like, first of all, I fire up some muscle. Yeah. And they're normally going to be the slower twitch muscles. And then I'm going to fire up more and more and more until I fire up these bigger, faster twitch muscles. Yeah. And they're normally bigger, faster twitch muscles as well. And then we have something called rate coding, which is rate coding is actually more kind of like it's an impulse. It's an impulse of firing the muscles. And we're going to have to develop that as using in strength training, because it's actually the ability to create tension and hold tension and maintain the tension in the muscles that we're firing. So that's super important. They actually, like we're discussing, the neurological benefits and how you actually have to train kind of neurological systems to be the best as you can. It's called powerlifting, right? And powerlifting is normally explosive like movements. Like you want to train the brain as much as possible as well. Then we have these kind of, like we discussed briefly, these inter and intramuscular coordination. When that happens, so the brain has to obviously fire up these fast and slow twitch fibers. It doesn't just fire them up in the one muscle unless it's an isolated exercise, but there's no real true single isolated exercise that exists. There's always going to be some amount of compound, and these big lifts are the most compound. And what we're going to find is we're going to have these intermuscular coordination where we fire up a bunch of muscles, and it's how well the brain can synchronize and organize these over time. Like the better the brain gets at that, the more specific our training is towards a certain exercise, the better the brain gets at coordinating exercises. And then we have this kind of like this inter-coordination where we don't want any weak links, right? If some muscles are weak links, we want to make sure there's not a bottleneck to the weak link, and we want to make sure they're well trained. With that, we have the peripheral. So then we have what's actually happening structurally when we do high tension activities, high strength activities. What's happening there is with the muscle architecture will actually change. So we have angles of muscle line. This is one of the biggest shown things that, especially recently, is that how the angle of the muscles will actually change according to the stimulus that we provide to it. And when we're doing strength training, they normally change to create more force faster. So that's going to happen over time. That won't happen straight away, but it does definitely big changes with stuff like that. Tissue stiffness. Well, so now we don't want our tendons to be so springy. We actually want them to create a little bit more stiffness under heavier loads. So what actually happens is we normally tend, again, looking at athletic performances, we normally tend to lose that kind of that spring in our muscles. Yeah, muscles get bigger and we create more muscle fibers. And the fiber types, there's some different information on this, but fiber types change slowly to more fast twitch fibers. So the fast twitch fibers being that the bigger muscle fibers, the faster, the more explosive muscle fibers, the ones that can move the most amount of weight. And they're really the two kind of sides of things. You got the central, the way the brain operates to the body, and then you got the structural changes, which are more the peripheral. And when I look at like hypertrophy and strength, I see the big difference being in that kind of central nervous system when it comes to strength over hypertrophy. Lots of them things that happen in the strength with hypertrophy happen with just hypertrophy training. Yeah. I'm sorry, my little blurb there.
Go, mate. Go. Just
So,
enjoy.
then the next one is it's how to get strong. So all the other information aside, probably why you're listening to this podcast, I would say, is because you're like, okay, now stop talking about science. I want to actually know how to get strong, right? And we have the same principles of strength trainers we have with hypertrophy, right? We have nearly any kind of training. We want two things: we want specificity, and we want progressive overload. We have to make sure the specificity is directing us in the right direction to achieve our goals. And we want to make sure that we're progressively overloading. So continuously challenging ourselves enough to adapt to these higher tensions, these higher loads, and that kind of neurological and structural thing that I was just talking about.
That specificity is like how we train is how we'll adapt. So training isn't just this random thing we do in the gym and we just pull a bunch of things together and we hope we get stronger. We have to organize certain things in certain areas to get specific adaptation. So what we said earlier, how do you define strength? What is your strength goal? And let's say, for example, it is to improve a squat. So our specificity is we're going to be doing a squat to get your squat stronger. And we'll be doing other movements that look very similar to a squat to help drive that adaptation even further. So we might block a certain structure of a certain rep range, probably like that 3 to 8 rep range, something of that with a pretty hard intensity. And that's going to help drive those neurological changes and those physiological changes to help you get where you need to go. So a big thing here too with that progressive overload, and this is like we talked about earlier, the biggest driver for us is weight increase. So we need to be tracking to some degree to first know what our maximal capabilities are of like a 1 rep max. So like if I'm doing a maximal effort, it's 1 F and I'm just getting it out, it's so goddamn hard, it's like a 10 out of 10 with intensity, there's my 1 RM. And I can work back from that and find out and break it down to like an 80% effort to up to like a 95% effort for those good strength stimulus. And that's going to be somewhere in that 3 to 6 rep range. And they're the best qualities and best rep ranges to kind of keep driving your strength adaptations.
And we're going to look at where the person is on their journey, right? If you're just starting out, that you might not even test the 1 rep max. You might test a 3 rep max because that's pretty more than enough right now. And there's actually a really big contrast between what someone can do for 5 and what they can do for 1 when they're beginning out. And you'll pretty find that they're very close. And then later on with training age, you'll find that all of a sudden the difference between your 5 and a 1 is actually far greater. Then when you're testing, I just say make sure you've got a spot. Like we've all had it, right? You got to find someone in the gym if you're training on your own, and you got to find someone to spot you, because when you're doing a 1 rep max, the 1 rep max, the max is the word, right? That means that you do not have any reps in the tank left. So you are going to be so close to failure that you might not actually achieve the rep. So you want to make sure you've got someone spotting you and someone spotting you properly. It's hard these days in commercial gyms to actually find someone who knows how to spot you. Do not touch the bar unless I'm about to die.
Don't touch the
and
bar.
What they do is they grab it at the bottom because you look like you're dying, but you're like, I can still get this.
Yeah, exactly right. That's the thing about 1 RMs as well, is that velocity is going to be slow.
Yeah.
Like we'll talk about velocity-based training later down the track. Yeah, but 100%, if it's a 1 RM, it shouldn't look like it's going up easily. Like someone should want to run over and grab it off your chest. That's how slow it should be moving. And that's how you know it's a true measure of strength. And that's what the difference is between that 1 RM, 5 RM. Like why you're going to see differences between that as you train more down the track as well.
So, such a good point. And there's a lot of what the coach does in the gym, right? If we see a bar move super fast or a dumbbell move super fast, that's pretty why we're going to tell you to go a little bit heavier, because we're looking at the speed to the kind of the rep range. And then we're thinking about what the intensity is on the board, but in the program. And then if we see it move too fast, you're pretty like, okay, we're not actually trying to move we want to be moving as fast as we can, but being made slow by the way.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's where that progressive overload comes in as well. People don't know how to push themselves sometimes, especially starting out. Like you can ask a new client, hey, how was that out of 10? That was 9 out of 10. That wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
Like,
You moved as fast as
you know it wasn't
yeah,
when you
exactly
see it.
right.
Well,
And then you put the weight up on them and they do it exactly the same again. They said, hey, that wasn't as hard. So it's about like learning that concept of how did that actually feel, that rating and perceived designation, that how many could I have left in the tank. That's a big part of training as well. That comes with learning. That comes with being in the gym for a while.
I think as soon as you see an individual like that, it moves it like it's just flying up and like, oh, that yeah, I had maybe 1 rep in reserve. You're a liar. But that's also a beginner. They're learning, and that clearly says that's a beginner. Someone that can kind of understand their outputs and like build intra-abdominal tension and pressure and max out effort to know kind of exactly how much they got in the tank. That's straight away like an intermediate to advanced lifter that
no, that's like quite a
understands their
skill.
outputs.
Yeah, exactly right.
And
That's a skill to have, and that takes time to develop. But it is good as a like an intermediate to beginner learner to have someone there pushing you, saying, "Hey, you can do more than this. This is what you should be doing," as opposed to just lifting light every week and not getting that stimulus that you need to progressively overload.
Totally, and sometimes that's why training to failure can really show you the kind of the true colors. It's like you're doing a 10 rep set where we're saying like keep 2 in the tank, and you're like that's 2 in the tank, and then really okay, well, if we said to you afterwards, well, go to failure with the same weight, and you end up getting 15, 16, 17, 18. It can be a good telltale of actually, well, I don't know my actual training max just yet, but I can guide off that sometimes. So sometimes learning can be like, okay, I'm going to do 2, 3 good sets, and then I'm going to go to failure. Then I can write in my notebook or whatever that next week I need to, I actually need to go a bit heavier.
And there it is, tracking, right? Writing it down.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if we're chasing numbers, and strength is a big thing for us. And we're trying to increase intensity, right? Not necessarily throwing lots of extra reps in. Like volume increases isn't the biggest teller for strength. It's getting more weight on the bar or dumbbell or wherever it happens to be. So using that as your main metric of success with chasing strength is what you're after. And that comes from knowing your abilities and like knowing your percentages, and also being able to track and slowly build to wherever you need to go by tracking it down week to week, session to session.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's so important because that's going to tell you when to overload as well. Like there's heaps of rules out there for overload. One off the top of my head, 2 for 2 rule. If you did 2 reps over what you were designed to do in the program 2 weeks in a row, up the weight. Like that's simple as that. And tracking that is going to help you do that. That's going to help you to stimulate that progressive overload that you need to make those training adaptations.
Oh, amazing. And then there's more on the lines of kind of like beginners, but then when we've got someone who actually maybe has done a comp or wants to do a comp and has been training for a while, then what we actually might want to do is a good way of setting it up is you have your competition max, and you got to understand that you don't want to be continuously working at your competition max. That's a completely different environment. It's going to hype you up tons. You're going to probably lift the heaviest you've ever lifted in a competition, where you kind of hope so. Then you have your max that you normally lift in the gym. Anyway, these are good numbers to have, right? That your max when you go 1 rep max in the gym with a spot, and then you have your training max. And normally with the training max, we just take 10% of it, right? So these are the kind of, you're still going to get strength gains from staying around this area, but it's going to allow us to train more frequently, so we don't run into so much fatigue, because a true 1 rep max can get you neurologically for like 72 hours after that session. So we might not be able to get as many quality sessions in. So you kind of want to make sure you know them numbers and then work off them numbers rather than just always working. And I see people do this. It's like ego lifting. Because they have a competition max. They're just continuously trying to max their competition, improve it. But actually, like you just go slightly off the baseline, like of your max, work underneath it, and then slowly improve that for them. Kind of like we said, them kind of like actually. Well, you could really think of it like this: like absolute strength training, like maximum strength training is going to be your 1 rep max in the gym. And to get strong, you're not going to do that much. Really, you're going to actually improve in strength, working in kind of that 3 to 5, 3 to 8 rep range.
Yeah, exactly. And that's working at the right percentage of that 1RM. But that doesn't mean testing that 1RM every week, because it takes a while to recover from a 1RM test. Especially if you're in there doing it every week, ego lifting, as you're saying, you're not going to be achieving what you could be if you're doing a proper periodized program where you're working at the right percentage of that maximum that you've been tested, but in that rep range of 3 to 5 reps.
The funnest thing with those powerlifting competitions isn't necessarily watching the lift, it's the hype up to the lift.
Oh, it's always,
it's trying to get them so pumped up, their nervous system jacked up, so sympathetically driven that they're kind of lifting at their highest potential. And like strength work you need a high level of preparedness because it's so neurologically stimulating, and we're lifting high loads. Like not eating, being tired and lethargic and not wanting to do it. Man, that's hard. That is hard to try and lift like 80, 90% of your maximal reps when you're feeling down. The ability to prepare and get yourself in a really good zone to crush and slay the weight is a must. And having the ability to kind of auto-regulate your nervous system and kind of pick it up where it needs to go, not overstim it like we just said there, but trying to rise the nervous system to reach the task at hand. That's a big part of doing your strength work. And that comes to having the ability to be prepared prior, eating well, looking after your sleep, de-stressing where possible, all those little lifestyle factors. But you've got to rise to the occasion of whatever the weight you've got to move to that day is.
Yeah, and you can program in like high stim days, but I just wouldn't have them too frequently. Like you can program in kind of the ammonia salt sniffing, get your mate to slap you on the back of the head, spotted 1 rep maxes, but you definitely like you got to understand that the more the stimulus is, the longer you're going to recover from, and it may even indent your actual progression in your training plan. So you might have to drop off some of the intensity for your next session, which is going to slow you down and hinder you. But you can do it, and you can set up these kind of like fake competition days to, I'd say, way before your actual competition phase. So you kind of got an idea of what kind of weight you're going to move, and then move forward towards comp. And that kind of sets us up for kind of like phases and programming, where you're going to have these more like potentiation phases. So you're going to have phases where, well, we know a bigger muscle has potential to create a stronger muscle. So it's time to actually let's do some more bodybuilding-esque, but keep it on the strength side of bodybuilding kind of stuff. You're going to need like technique as kind of like as an important role in your training as well, because as we discussed, coordination is such a big player in your big strength movements. So when we're changing up exercises, we're going to make sure that these exercises most often look like the exercise we want to get better at. Obviously, the strength phases where you're actually just trying to increase strength, so you're doing them kind of like we said, them 3 to 5 kind of rep ranges, and then you're going to need like your kind of like peaking phases and tapering phases coming towards like that kind of competition.
Heaps of good points there, James. I just want to reiterate one point just prior to that. It's like a stimulus to fatigue ratio. Like when we're doing our strength work, I just want to do enough hyping, enough work where I just get a little weight stimulus needed for progression. But then I don't need to keep hyping myself up past that. After that, it's just wasted. It's just now junk volume. I just got to drop down my intensity and get the rest of my program done. So sustaining high overjacked efforts for like a long period, it's not going to do you much. Just get what your main lift is, get that slight marginal gain and move on. Because those marginal gains will compound and give you a just slightly going above. Like we just said, we've got higher chances of recoverability, and I can have another better next session. And on top of that, that compounds again and again and again by weeks, by months. And point A to point B over the course of 52 weeks is huge progression. It's being kind with yourself and slowly layering it rather going, all right, I'm testing again today. I feel good. I had so much pre-workout, it's test day.
Exactly right, because there's that such fine line between that functional overreach that you're talking about, where you can stimulate that and get a really good lift in, and then an overuse injury. So pushing yourself every week to get that 1 RM, it's going to make that increase like that likelihood of getting injured, as opposed to just having an overreach, having a deload, getting back up there, getting that little stimulus at a time, as opposed to just slamming it every single week.
And again, that overreach is going to have to come quite far away from your actual competition, or it's going to be planned for the competition being the overreach. And as well as that, like we have discussed this quite in detail, but we kind of have them maximal recoverable volumes and the minimal effective doses and minimal effective volumes. So the idea is that we want to make sure that while we're training for improvement, that we stay just underneath that maximal recoverable volume in time to train. Like whereas with strength training, like we'll discuss this a little bit more in detail. Like we have different frequencies that we want to see with kind of strength training, and there's obviously different methods to come up with the frequencies. But when you are going higher, when you're doing more of like a bodybuilding split and you're trying to build the muscle to increase muscle mass, you're going to train more frequency. You're going to train more frequently at lower intensities. But then when we come into actually challenging strength a little bit more, you hear some of the best, the strongest men doing powerlifters doing like just 2 to 3 sessions a week. Like because they're challenging themselves so much that they're giving themselves like kind of 72 hours, then kind of 3 days before they train again and then training again. Because it's really important that we don't overstimulate ourselves. And this is where I think like for myself, I think undulated programming's come in really well, where that's kind of like a 3 sessions a week, or it can be more. But normally you're going to have this kind of like this high intensity, low volume day. So that's kind of your day where you come in and you're actually going to you're going to move some heavy weight. Then you're going to have another day. It's kind of like a low intensity, higher volume, and then you're gonna have a moderate intensity and moderate volume day. So you can kind of control and have like peaks and waves of knowing when to like slightly drop off the intensity, so you're fresh and ready to then increase the intensity. And like Mitch was just saying, making them small gains each week like that is going to really benefit you towards your goals.
Again, love it. Like as we said earlier, we have certain training phases and plans to get certain adaptation. Like I think a really good example of talking hypertrophy, like putting muscle on the body, getting jacked, and moving weights and putting on plates. Like I just look at we've already said a couple of times, a bodybuilder and a powerlifter. They look very different, right? You got one with very low body fat, all about putting meat on the bones, and one that's not necessarily about that. Yes, weight moves weight, but it's more about performance-based, more about moving numbers. And those, if you watch them in the gym, 24-hour gym, they will move very different. One's having long rest periods, lifting heavy weights for low reps. One's moving like more control, time under tension, smaller breaks, getting more volume on certain muscle groups and more frequency. And you'll just watch that in play and just know that those two different methods lead to two different avenues and two different adaptations. So again, like strength, we said a little bit earlier, we're looking probably like that 3 to 8. Looking at a percentage of your max rep of your 1RM being like somewhere between like 80 to 90 to 95. It needs to be pretty hard and pretty intense.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that really enforces the point that we started off the whole podcast with: is strength is contextual. These two guys that you're talking about, they're both training strength, but the path that they've taken is so different. And all of their workouts, all their periodization is going to be different. All of their goals are going to be different as well. So I think that's really important to stress, that each individual can have their own definition of what strength is when it comes to them personally.
I think what's really interesting as well is we can discuss kind of like the breakdown of a session. So in the session, like you kind of your meat and potatoes at the beginning of the session, that's where you're going to go. So whether you're undulating or whatnot, you've decided to choose as your programming week to week was kind of like your mesocycle. Then we have a kind of a microcycle, or we have the day breakdown, right? So in the day, how are we going to organize our training around the day? Well, normally what we do is we have our main lifts, and then off the back of our main lifts, we have our accessory lifts. And ideally, what we're going to do is we want our main lifts to be very specific, and like they're going to get more specific as time goes on. Like Cannon mentioned earlier, like there is risk of injuries as well from overreaching, but they also can be from repetitive. So it can be really beneficial away from a competition to do a similar, like an incline bench press instead of your flat bench press, a decline bench press instead of your flat bench. And then as we get closer to competition time, we're going to take that main lift and we're going to make it look a lot more like our main exercise. That's going to do two things as well. That's going to actually allow us to make sure there's no weaker muscle fibers in the body, so we can have that intramuscular coordination fire in properly. It's going to limit risk of injury from allowing tendons and ligaments to have some time off in certain positions. And then as well as that, and then when we get into the main movement, we're going to develop them very specific coordinations to the actual exercise. And then we talk accessory exercises. Well, accessory exercises, again, like we talked about, they can be like a bit more hypertrophy focused. They can be to increase muscle size. So a bigger muscle can be a stronger muscle, but they can also be like movement strength. So for example, I'm performing a squat, a back squat, and I tend to fall forward a lot by breaking through my mid back, my mid thoracic kind of thing. Then, well, what we can do is we can add in exercises specific to that back squat where we can start training the spinal erectors. So there's always got to be like you're planning out this big plan, like from end of one competition all the way to the next competition, and then inside that you're looking at the individual program layout and what kind of exercises I want at what kind of times for the best possible outcome.
If we're looking at strength too, like a big effort when you're selecting that right movement, e.g., we already said it's task dependent. If you have like a competition or a said lift that must be achieved, obviously the movement has to be that or look like that to kind of get the same stimulus you need. A very important effort is that movement has to feel good. So there's heaps of ways to do a movement, right? Like there's like 120 bloody variations of a squat. Having a squat variant that feels good for you, if that low bar back squat is like crushing you and smoking you and just doesn't feel good in any way, we can pick modifications of that. Go high bar and we can get some great adaptation. Does that feel better? Are we getting good stimulus? Can I move heavy loads? Those connective tissues, those joints feel better with that? Does my back feel better? Happy days. And then I can get more maybe skill specific closer to that like mid portion of that comp. And then I'll see how I'll go with low bar and then maybe taper back off. But that grooving of the position is so important, making sure it feels good. Because there's so many ways to get the same result or get a similar result. Another effort with that simplicity, we don't want to be training these high loads on a Bosu ball, one hand over our head, like trying to move big ass weight. Get those feet grounded, pick a movement that's relatively simple, it feels comfortable, and you feel comfortable with heavy loads on. So simplicity over complexity is massive. You want to be grounded, you want to feel comfortable in the position, and feel comfortable with moving heavy loads repetitively and be okay with that. So that's up to you to try and find those movements and see what feels better for you and on your body.
Like one of the fantastic point, Mitch. Like I find it hard to believe that anyone thinks they can get strong by hanging around on a Bosu ball or jumping on a Swiss ball. And that comes to the specificity as well. Like if you're grounded, your feet are on the ground when you're doing nearly everything, right? But especially in powerlifting, right? On a squat and a deadlift, and in the bench, but your feet are grounded. You're using the ground for your force. Like actually, most ground, like the ground is actually where we're creating the most force on all of them it is where we're creating the most force in all the exercises. To then have an unstable surface underneath your feet makes absolutely no sense. And the amount of force that you can create for the ground will be so minimized, and the chance of risk and injury is greatly increased. So it just it doesn't make any sense. And I'm surprised. I'm in a bit of a bubble where I don't see anyone do that anymore. But every now and then it just pops up. I'm like, wow,
Oh, you
It
see a
looks
couple
great
of
on the
randos
gram.
in the gym.
Am I not-
Yeah,
oh, am I?
yeah, you see a couple of rogue ones in the gym doing it. I don't know about you boys, but I haven't seen any powerlifting meets on BOSU balls recently. But
Yeah.
that's just me.
That sounds actually
Maybe,
fantastic.
maybe
That's
we
an
need to
idea.
invent it.
Implement that. Yeah.
How much force can you create on this ball? And the balls just get bigger. Like something
But it's functional.
yeah. Oh, there you go. Oh, damn. So off the back of that, like methods, like oh, like with methods, different ways or different methods that people have created in like getting like kind of the best out of your programming and your periodization or your plan. So a couple of them I really love is like I love triphasic training. So it's made very famous by Cal Dietz. But the idea of triphasic training is to take advantage of the three phases of a lift, right? So the first phase is the eccentric phase, it's the downwards phase of a movement. Then you have the isometric phase, which is the bottom, the pause, but also where we change direction. And then you have the concentric, is where we kind of like push the weight back up. And if you actually look at these three phases, the eccentric phase, we're actually stronger than we are in the concentric phase a fair bit. The isometric phase, yeah, we're still stronger than the concentric phase as well. And the concentric phase is pretty much how we measure strength. And that's also going to be your weakest phase. So it's going to be your limiter. But bear in mind that like it makes a lot of sense to spend more time or some time devoting yourself to each one of them phases to create as much strength as possible, especially when we know the eccentric phase has one of the biggest muscle building, strength building, kind of like a change of muscle fiber than any other phase. So actually going to super maximal efforts on eccentrics can be a fantastic way of training, then into obviously in a safe way, then going into super maximal isometrics and then building back up on your concentrics can be an amazing phase or a couple of phases of training. As well as that, another one that I really like is hypertrophy strength clusters. It's something that I've done quite a lot of myself, and it's kind of like before you actually go all out on strength, you do strength and hypertrophy together. Maybe a little bit more hypertrophy than strength, but you work multiple sets of 5s, 3s, and 1s. It's something we've done in the gym a couple of times, and that allows me to actually go to a high percentage of my max, still leaving a good few in the tank, recover in short amounts of time, but then get the volume that also allows me to get to build muscle mass, while at the same time stimulating myself enough not to lose any strength gains or even increase my strength gains.
Give you a fun one here, guys, a usable one straight away. Your warm up, like a warm up.
Oh, yeah.
So like just a good old squat's fine enough, moving that light bar pretty fast and putting some weight on it. Yeah, that's okay. That's cool. Remember, this is nervous system. We want to get it jacked up. We want to trick it to overperforming. So like doing light things super fast that look like the movement you want to do is a great tool. You're doing a bench, throw a med ball on your back and hit the ceiling and catch and go again. You're doing a squat, like a box jump can be sweet, a depth jump, or grabbing a ball and pegging it into the ceiling can be fantastic as well. Moving it for super high velocities for a couple of reps can be a great way, just to warm you up, get the heat in the body, but also jack that nervous system up in that same movement pattern at high speeds, at high power outputs. It's an instant, bloody great one you can integrate today.
And this has been studied a ton. Like it's called we call it PAP or post activation potentiation. It's pretty amazing what you can do by stimulating your brain with explosive movements and what you can get out of it. And that can be like that could be phases of actually doing strength with explosive movements as well. The benefits you can reap from that are pretty incredible. And still kind of underlying, people don't totally understand exactly why. They have a lot of theories on why it works, but they don't actually totally understand unless there's new information out that I haven't seen.
I think a really cool one with this too, as we said, like so much strength work, it does kind of slow you down and make you a little bit less reactive and a little bit less bouncy. And it's a great way in that nervous system for individuals that are very biased into those movements and just are like big fridges that can barely turn and barely like run or anything of that nature. It's a great way to keep those qualities still alive in parts of your warm up and not over obsess on them. But you can do your plyo, your jumpy, your fast paced work and still keep some of those qualities alive as you're still hyper specializing in big strength outputs. Like big fridges are great for moving weight, but not always the greatest in our biomechanics and our movement. So it's a nice way to keep those things alive in the background.
Mitch, that's such an incredible point, and I think it makes a good point to like kind of discuss slightly why you don't want all your training. If you're general population or you play a sport, why you don't want to only chase strength, because there's a lot of like some of them structural adaptations that happen like in your body with your muscles, with your tissues, to allow yourself to take on higher loads for longer periods of time. They're not going to be favorable to moving and turning. Well, if you think about the bench, the squat, and the deadlift, well, all three of them exercises are bilateral, symmetrical. So I have two legs planted in side by side. There's no rotation at all. And any little bit of rotation in my body is actually going to hinder. It's going to be it's going to be an internal instability, and that internal instability is going to allow me to not create as much force because I want to be as stable as physically possible. And then what that's going to happen is I'm going to want to slowly teach myself to lose that rotational capacity. And as a human being, like if you want to just feel good, move good, get strong, just for being strong and feeling amazing, well, you probably want to take that into consideration, because you aren't going to be able to rotate, and every step you take is rotation. So you better make sure that you are playing around like that. We do that a lot with our training. We make sure that we're incorporating like tissue qualities, rotational qualities, and all that stuff that we don't want you to lose from getting strong.
I made that mistake as a young fella, playing lots of rugby league in my early 20s, and not say I was good, but I did all right. But one of my biggest mistakes is a hyper specializing in trying to get stronger. I did so much powerlifting that one of my best qualities when playing footy was to be more elusive and to fend and to create second phase play. But when I got too hyper specialized in strength, well, I just turned into linear. I wanted to play like a forward rather than a back. So it changed my whole dimensions and my qualities of how I liked to play and what I was slightly better at. And I went into an opposite direction, which I wasn't naturally that great at. So I think it's really important when young athletes are looking at how to get better at their sport, mate, just playing your sport is the best thing you can do, and hyper specializing whatever your game is. Strength is just an accessory. It's there to help you out in some areas. Don't hyper specialize it. Keep those beautiful rotational bouncy qualities that make you great at your sport. And strength is just there to assist, but don't hyper specialize.
You see a lot of the information on that. Is you see that actually when people start in the gym, they instantly realize that on the field they're a little bit more explosive, a little bit more powerful, and then later on that you find this kind of like this information of people saying, oh, and then I got my bench up to like what 120, 125, and then all of a sudden I couldn't jump as high, I couldn't move as fast anymore.
Yeah.
And it's just slowly that you are becoming a little bit. Well, sometimes we need a bit of rigidity, we need a bit of stiffness, but then too much stiffness is definitely going to slow you down. So bear that in mind if you when you're choosing to be a kind of a power lifter, like a strength sport as such, that you are going to have to lose a little bit of your kind of fluidity and movement to actually to exhale. Yeah, not to be good, like just to exhale at it.
I picture Thanos, like all things require balance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
Well,
100%. Because that's something I've definitely found in football as well. I used to be skinny kid, 55 kilos, like little guy. I was always weaving, ducking, diving, running through defenders and stuff. Then I got really into my strength stuff, exactly what you were saying. Started cranking out bench, started cranking out deadlifts, all that kind of thing. And I found in recent years, obviously, I put on a fair bit of muscle mass and all that kind of thing. So I need that more oxygen demand as well. But even just changing direction, jumping, all that kind of thing, doesn't come as naturally as it used to. So in terms of that hyper specialization, like you're saying, make sure you stick to your sport, and the exercise that you are doing, the more specific they are to your sport, the better as well. So those rotational qualities that you're talking about, things that you're actually going to use in a game situation as well, are really valuable things that you can recreate in the gym as well.
100%. It just makes me think of someone like making a cut. Like the fact that they're going to have to go into the ground, they're going to have to put into the ground, they're going to have to absorb into the ground and push off the ground. Well, at first, when you start some strength, you're like, well, a cut is very strength orientated, right? It's actually one of the most strength orientated things on a field. Well, the second I put my foot in the ground, well, if I get a little bit stronger, I'm going to be able to push off, like load into it. Again, that eccentric, isometric, and concentric phase, I'm going to load into it and then be able to push off really fast. But as I get heavier, stronger, and stiffer, I'm actually going to go into it. I'm going to have to take longer and longer and longer to create my force out of that position, because that's what I've used to from using heavy weights, and therefore I am going to eventually become slower. So there is them diminishing returns from strength, definitely. And one other thing with it, which is kind of like diminishing on the side, is we have interferences. So say, for example, you want to, like, powerlifting is going to be your thing, right? You're going to do a competition. Well, you'd look at what you're doing outside of powerlifting. While other things that you're doing outside could be really good recreationally and could improve quality of life, but if you are doing too much of an endurance type sport, like something where you're playing too many games of, you're playing more than one game or two games of soccer, you're going for these long distance runs, well, these things have interference. They have interference in the fact that you will be more tired and you won't be able to perform as well. Your energy is not going to go to actually the nervous system repair, the strength repair. but it's going to go more to actually the repairing from that kind of like cardiovascular system, or just fueling it. But you're also going to have these other like biomechanical, like muscular and nervous tissue, that nervous tissue levels of interference. So it's kind of really important that you kind of look at what you're doing inside the gym, like Mitch said earlier, like how you're recovering, but also what you might be doing outside that might be interfering with you making it to your gains. And it's not going to hurt you too much if you do want to exceed in a competition. Sometimes to actually just spend some time only working towards that for a while. It can be really be uplifting.
Just want to quickly touch on, and not dive in too hard, but just talk about food, man. It's hard to really progress with your strength and put like plates on the bar when you're not getting enough food in the system. So like we've done other potties on food if you want to check them out, but pretty much you want to be like in a maintenance or even better when in a surplus. Making sure that you've had a bit of food before it, like remember I said earlier, preparation, like having some carbs, like prior training, that's easy, accessible fuel that you can use straight away for the session. So making sure you've got something in the system and you're kind of slightly sitting above your maintenance level, you might gain a bit of weight. That's not the end of the world. And that's going to help you like perform so much more effectively. And how you recover from one of these big sessions. Remember, the really nervous system intense. The body's like, holy shit, I need fuel to get back up. Making sure you got some carbs, some good protein post session to help you recover and bound back and get back into the next session is huge. So paying attention to that food quality is definitely something to think about, and making sure that you've got some sort of system to coincide with your training and your training outputs is definitely something to kind of plan and consider.
Yeah, you definitely really can never talk about anything, any performance improvement without discussing to some level your nutrition and what you're doing with your nutrition, and just making sure, like Mitch said, that making sure just it is periodized with or planned. I prefer the word planned. Sometimes it's a bit more simple. Like the is planned alongside your training. So you're actually making sure that you're eating at the right times, you're recovering with using your nutrition, and you're peaking with your by using your nutrition as well. I think any other points, guys? We've covered a lot.
I hope that you all get strong and put multiple plates on the bar and lift the heaviest dumbbells you can, guys. Get strong.
Get
Big,
out there and get strong. That's all that matters.
strong.
Hopefully, today has helped you figure out how to do that, and hopefully, we're giving you some good methods, some good advice on getting strong as well. But
I think so. So just one point, just like quickly, like off that, it's like if you do have someone, and I try all the time with kind of the in-laws and stuff like that. If you do have someone you know that is kind of a little bit against strength training, and they are in their older age and stuff, and or they just maybe could look like they could do with some strength training because they maybe have never before. But this would be a good podcast to get them to listen to. I would definitely for the older age groups. I think it's so important that they get into strength training as soon as possible, and it's never too late.
Never. And hopefully you can change that. It's going to take time, right? Change that cultural effort, because I'm sure you think your in-laws, even my parents, I kind of have that bias here. Like, oh, I don't strength train. I'm too old for that. No, you're not. Your parents will never listen to you, but like someone that comes in that will pay you will listen to you, and suddenly it's in effect, and they get benefit, and unfortunately your loved ones miss out. But hopefully we can change that cultural bias in the upcoming years, and educate the people now, so when they get older, they can teach the younger generation, and so forth. That beautiful butterfly effect, and we're all lifting weights and we're all strong, tanned, and jacked.
Yeah, and it goes to say, doesn't it? Just feeling capable and like being extremely strong, or just challenging what your body is capable of. Putting your body in an environment where it has to adapt, obviously slowly and steadily, but putting your body in that environment can be extremely can really pay off.
Sweet. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you, and look forward to chatting you on the next one.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.